Dan, thanks for joining me, man. I know we've been trying to make this work for, a month and a half or maybe a little longer with your schedule. Things are pretty wild.
Yeah, especially the last month and a half. So
especially the last 24 hours, I would say.
Yeah, that hasn't helped either with Biden's recent announcements on the vaccine mandates, as I'm sure you're referencing.
Yeah.
There's not that many dull days in politics, unfortunately.
Yeah, so let's just jump right into it, because I know we're on a bit of a time constraint. What are your thoughts about the response to COVID and the vaccine mandates that we heard from the president, even just in the last, like I said, 12 hours or so?
Well, I mean, we should start generally. The response to COVID, what is a reasonable response to a pandemic? And that's not really a question that got debated with any seriousness really since the beginning. I've always been of the opinion that it's a pandemic and there's really a limited amount that you can do about it.
Right.
This is the first time in history for a disease like this that we've even talked about widespread mask wearing or lockdowns or shelter in place orders. Now, if you got something that's like an extinction level event with, a 50% mortality rate, it's probably reasonable to be talking about those measures.
Sure.
But with something that's basically a hyper flu, I'm not sure that it's ever been reasonable to even be discussing those measures. And then when you have the benefit of hindsight and you're looking at the data about, do these measures even have an effect on the trend of the virus? And it turns out that it doesn't.
Right.
So you really got to question, what the hell are we doing?
You're talking about lockdowns, mask mandates.
Lockdowns
sort of
especially.
Right.
Specifically lockdowns. But the jury is still out on masks as well. That science is not clear. Intuitively kind of makes sense. You can't spit on somebody if you're wearing a mask. But there's other indications that show it still does very little to slow the spread. But, that's less of a cost on humanity than lockdowns. So, it's not as big of a deal. We should separate those two things. But so that's my general feelings on the response. And then Biden gets elected saying he's going to crush the virus, which is a pretty stupid thing to say, because you just don't get to have that kind of control over the virus.
Right. I think at this point, we have to assume, this is my take anyways, that we're just going to live with COVID indefinitely, like we live with other colds and viruses and things like that.
And the more you hide from it, the longer it's going to take to live with it in a reasonable manner. The longer it's going to take for it to become like the flu,
right? Where
we view it like the flu. And we really should be getting there quickly. And again, the more we hide from it, the more we keep acting like it's such an extraneous event. The longer it'll take to build that immunity that we need to get used to it.
Do you think it's an overabundance of caution, or do you think it's deliberately and intentionally being wielded as a tool for consolidation of power?
I don't think they're that smart. I don't think that Democrats and the left in general have these sort of meetings in smoky rooms where they're like, we all know this is bullshit, but we're going to do it so that we can implement this kind of control. I don't think they do that.
But aren't there a few people who do that, and then that kind of moves the needle, and some people maybe feel like they have noble intentions, but they're being manipulated to move an agenda forward?
No, I think they're wired much differently than conservatives, and they honestly just think differently. Again, I don't think they're smart enough to strategize the way that we. And conservatives are always trying to figure out this. We're always trying to theorize as to okay, there's no way that a reasonable person can possibly think this, so there must be this ulterior motive. And what I have to explain to people is you need to study the psychology of the left a little bit better. This is how they think. They believe the crap they're saying. Now, they might not have at first. They might have been skeptical at first, but they quickly made themselves believe it. They believe, so they have sort of a pathological sense of compassion, right? Just like a mother bear has a pathological sense of compassion. If you get near her cub, she'll kill you.
Right.
Now, is that a reasonable response?
Reasonable. Sure, of course.
Just because you're a hiker and you walked by, is it reasonable that this mother bear killed you? That's pathological compassion. And the left has that. The left can't see anything but their own version of compassion, and they're willing to kill for it. They're willing to control for it. They're willing to become ultra authoritarians for it, just so they can moralize over you. So it's important to understand that that's how they think and that's who they are, just dispositionally speaking.
Well, it is interesting too, because there's a level of vitriol that I see from the quote unquote compassionate and the empathetic, right? That's what I've seen anyways. It's like, well, how can you be claiming to be so empathetic on this side, but then just so vile, frankly, in a lot of ways, in a slightly different context?
Because it's pathological compassion. That's where the pathological comes from, because it's gone too far and it's not well balanced, right? These are not balanced people. They moralize in a very strict sense on one thing. I have compassion for this one thing, and it eliminates all other forms of reasoning. It eliminates considerations for just governing structures. It eliminates considerations for really all other senses of morality. And if we want to kind of dive into that, of the psychology of morality, it would be things like so you have compassion and caring and kindness. These are considered moral attributes. But also a sense of authority is considered a moral attribute. Do you respect authority? Do you believe in a sense of authority? A sense of fairness. Now, people define fairness differently if they're on the left or the right, but these are all moral considerations. For instance, liberty might be considered, for the right at least, we consider that a moral consideration. The left doesn't. So because they exclude these categories, they have an inability to reason fully as fully thinking individuals.
Do you feel though on the other side of the aisle, can you make a similar argument for the conservative side of the aisle being too rational without having as much empathy? Like, do you feel like the conservative side of the aisle goes that way?
Yeah, there can be. You can get pathological on both
either
sides,
side, right?
And on the right, it would look a little bit more like that, like the kind of pathological need to preserve an institution even if it's not good,
right? And
because it's got to conservative.
Sure.
But so it can go too far. So the right balance is always, frankly, you need liberals to sort of point out injustices and like kind of scream and cry compassion. But you need conservatives to actually do the problem solving, because liberals are not suited for it at all. They always screw it up. They don't think about second, third order consequences. They don't think rationally. They think with their hearts. And this is the best kind of liberal, right? I think the worst kind are more the kinds you're talking about earlier, where secretly they just want more power.
Right. I've heard the distinction between liberals and leftists, for example, and I think that's kind of the distinction.
I think progressives, leftists are strictly authoritarians, and
because they believe that they can do it better, or that they're more compassionate, so that is the ultimate moral authority. Like, what is
all of it? I think. It's hard to dissect again the psychology of these people. For them to be so passionate about it, I'm sure they believe in their own good. Right. They believe in their own superiority. They're utopianists, and to get to a utopia that they envision, you have to have total control. And the Constitution and the Republic, they get in the way of these things. Checks and balances, our federalist system, they all get in the way of that streamlined decision making and action oriented philosophy that they want. It's action, action, action. And that kind of probably explains more why Biden is doing this, because his base demands action. They always want action. Like, for them, there is no problem that government can't solve and shouldn't be solving. All problems are there for government to solve. For conservatives, that's not true. That's actually one of the first questions we ask about a problem. One, is it a problem, or are you just making it up? Because a lot of times you're making it up.
Or is it that big of a problem?
Or you're exaggerating
right,
it
exactly.
wildly. But then the next question is, should government even have a hand in this? Because when government has a hand in this, there's cost to that. There's second and third order effects. So maybe we should dissect those. And then if government should have a role, which government? Should it be local, state, federal? These are reasonable questions for a reasonable government to be asking. And this comes from our founding philosophy of limited government. And so, but the left has no interest in those questions.
Do you feel like your entrance into the world of politics, which has really been over the past 4 years or so, do you feel like you've, let me ask it differently. How do you feel like you've changed? What have you seen? What have you experienced? And then how has that impacted you personally in the way that you view America and the way we function and everything else?
Well, I'm definitely more cynical and jaded than I might
I mean,
have been a few years
to
ago.
be frank, I hear it a little bit. And so I'm wondering if that's always been the case or if that changes and hardens you over time.
Yeah, I mean, I was definitely not naive or idealistic coming into it. Some people are, and like those are the politicians you generally hear from who are like, "Oh, you can't get anything done up here." No shit, dumbass. Like that's the point,
Right,
actually.
right.
So that's not what frustrates me. It's not Washington that frustrates me. It's just, I come from the military where I felt like I saw the best of Americans all the time, especially the SEAL teams, and now I'm in politics, and so I see the angriest people all the time. I see the meanest people. I mean, I'm just wondering, like, what's wrong with you, guy, who's just so angry online and just saying such vile things? Like,
What's
is
going on in
wrong
your
with
life?
you?
Right.
You know, and like, there's a lot. You know, I don't like that. I don't like what I see with the populist movements. I think leftism has always been a populist movement, at least the way I define it. And I don't like what I see rising
What do you mean
up
by
on the
populist
right.
movement?
So when I say populist, what I mean is telling people what they want to hear instead of the truth. And I don't think there's another good definition. When the populists try to define it, they're like, it's what the people want.
Right.
That's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. And let me tell you why. Because every politician, every political movement thinks they're doing what the people want. The thing is, and the reason we even have politics, is because people want different things.
Right.
And
Not
people have
everybody
different
wants the
ideas about how you might solve a problem. And so what we do is we divide ourselves into political parties and different philosophies about how you might go about problem solving. What's the best way to govern? And then we debate
looking at
that.
it different ways. Sure.
And then we debate that. It's all for the people. So you can't just say, well, it's what the people want. You know what? The people want free $2,000 checks. That doesn't make it good policy. Populism is stupid. It's reflecting people's emotions right back at them in order to gain their trust. That's manipulation. That's not leadership. Leadership is actually telling people the truth. So that's my definition of populism. That's how I debunk what the populists say populism is.
But it actually, so I've thought about this a lot, even just over the past couple of days, you know, and I think I made a post on Twitter earlier, and I said something like, you know, if the government would have just been more honest and had some integrity about COVID and just told the truth about what it is, what it isn't, what works, what doesn't work, I think more people would probably be vaccinated at this point.
Yeah.
But there's all sorts of red flags and alarms sounding for the American people when we have things like mandates, because we know the government isn't telling the truth.
Yeah.
And so it raises more red flags than just being honest about it.
Well, our public health institutions have lost an unbelievable amount of trust. Just in so many ways, the way they've acted, the way they've changed. I mean, there's so many examples that people listening probably already know, whether masks work or don't work. I mean, if you look in historic CDC guidance for pandemics, none of the crap we're doing is in it.
Right.
And it's not like these people were just stupid. It's just that was a time when emotions were taken out of it and politics were taken out of it, and it was just the science. And it turns out there's not a lot you can do. You know, it turns out, I mean, the best government could be doing is pretty much what we were doing under
Right.
Trump.
Flatten the curve. Let's not overwhelm the hospitals.
Well, I don't even mean that. I mean support the hospitals. You know, support the hospitals with funding, with hiring additional nurses. That's a government role.
Got it.
In a pandemic. The Operation Warp Speed, developing the vaccine in the first place, that's a government role. And all the government had to do was say, we'll buy it. And then private industry went ahead and did it.
Start making it, sure.
So, I mean, but I totally agree with what you're saying, which is, yeah, they've lost trust and they've made this whole vaccine thing. I mean, I have no reason to think there's any danger with the vaccine. I really don't. But when it's mandated, even me, a very rational person, I start to react a little bit.
Right. That's what I'm saying.
And so I totally get people's reactions, and it's been such an unnecessary. You know, look, if it's at a 50% mortality rate, you could make that argument a little better. But with the way things are, and with the fact that anybody who wants a vaccine can get it, and look, what you just need to keep telling people, if they really wanted to increase vaccine uptake, every single day they would show the statistics of who's hospitalized.
Right.
That's all you would do.
Right.
And say, look.
And then let people make their choices.
Is there a possibility that there's some risk to a vaccine? There always is. But your risk of getting COVID for many of you is far, far greater. So get the vaccine. And that would be the best argument. And then leave people the hell alone after that.
Yeah.
You know, again, we just have different philosophies. And for the right, it's like, look, there's only so much we can do. Not only that, but only so much we should do. The left just doesn't believe that. I mean, they really believe that they can control everything and that there's some moral good behind that. And but it just never works. And I don't know how many times we have to learn that lesson in just human history.
Well, we'll learn it when it gets hard enough, and then we'll course correct, and things will get more comfortable and easy, and then we'll learn it again. Do you have, knowing what you just said with, you know, feeling more cynical about it and what is wrong with these people, is it something that you feel like you have deeper and further political aspirations, or is this something you're like, well, you know, I did what I wanted to do, and now I'm going to move along and do something else, or?
I don't know. I just don't know. I don't have to make that decision for a while. There's no decision points coming up for me, so I don't have to think about these things a whole lot. And yeah, politics is a finicky business, and it is about opportunity. So if you're going to move up, you know, there's usually a seat opening or something. Sure. Like there's something that's happening that's kind of out of your control. It's not like maybe a normal career where you sort of lay out a pathway. And those who do lay out the pathway in politics, I think ultimately fail. Because it's too obvious to everybody. It's like, you're just trying to get to this next thing.
They want it too badly, and it turns people off. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. And that's just my observation. But I don't know. I mean, you do not do this job because it's likable. It's not an enjoyable job.
I don't know. I think some people do like it. Maybe I'm wrong.
Some people like being, like the title, I guess.
The title, I think other people like.
Like the place sucks.
Game.
I mean, it's
exactly.
Everybody thinks we're like super rich. It's like, no, I have to have 2 apartments, in DC and Houston. No, it sucks. And you're not getting a pay raise either.
Right,
by the way,
it's not going up.
Yeah, so there's just a lot of myths. Oh, you get retirement for the rest of your life. No, that's a myth. I'm not sure where that myth came from. It's not true. So it's just you do it because it's important and you can have some kind of impact. I mean, the reason you get into politics and not into policy, because that's where I was originally looking at. I got out of the military. I went to Harvard. To the Kennedy schools, which is basically a policy degree. And I was just looking at policy jobs. I'm not really even sure what that meant because I was, again, just leaving the military. But politics you get into because you want to affect a wide variety of policies and just have that bigger cultural impact. And so I do enjoy that. It's fulfilling. I wouldn't say it's enjoyable, but it is fulfilling.
Well, one thing I think you do really well is, and I think maybe the distinction between the two would be politics is more of the public front-facing side of things where we see. And so you do a good job explaining in your videos online and social media accounts, like, here's the real deal. Here's what I think. Here's the real issue. Here's what's going on. And I think that's helpful. And you do it just as well, if not better, than anybody else I've seen.
I appreciate it. Yeah, just try to kind of lift the curtain back a little bit. I mean, because I came from just being a normal voter, and I was never really politically oriented in the sense, like, I wasn't volunteering, wasn't going to rallies, didn't really care, which congressman was doing what. I followed politics broadly. I followed conservative thought, especially in my later 20s is when I really got into the policy side of it. But I really came into politics for the policy background. And interest base and philosophy base, and not even knowing anything about the politics of it. Right. If that makes sense. And so
for sure.
And so I guess, coming from that background, which I would say is how normal people are.
Yeah,
I was just a
I'm
normal
like that.
guy.
Most people are like that.
Like,
sure.
yeah, you're like, informed, but you're not like watching what Nancy Pelosi said that day so you can tweet about it.
Right.
There's a difference there. And what I always noticed was people just don't explain things. Like, they just speak in talking points, and it makes us not trust you when you just speak in talking points. It makes us think you either don't know what you're talking about or you're hiding something. So just explain it a couple layers deep. And so I just took that to Congress, and people like it. Yeah, because they just want to know. And it frustrates me even in our own conference when we're like thinking about bills and how to vote on it, how to message against HR3 the Democrats are putting out. And I always hate it when our own side says this will cause job losses.
It's like, well, explain that.
Just
a
tell
little
me
bit.
why.
Right.
Like just one more line.
Right.
Like why will it cause job losses? Because
Yeah.
they'll say the same crap about and everybody's like, well, they're bad, and well, they're bad, and then the voters are like, well, okay, well, you're both bad, got it. But
We already know
somebody
that.
give me an argument, and then I'll assess based on your argument who's bad.
Yeah.
And
Or who's wrong. Or
and
who's
yeah,
right,
and so
sure.
it just takes a couple minutes.
Yeah.
It doesn't take a long time, and also like directly confront their positions. This is another thing that never happens enough in politics, where we just kind of talk past each other.
Mm-hmm.
And they say one thing, and I'll say another thing that's it just doesn't really have
Right.
to do
It's
with what you
unrelated
said.
you didn't want to address that, so you kind of side
Yeah,
skirt.
and it's like no, just address exactly what they said, and like I think I'm very careful to do that. I want to know I want to get your argument right, and then attack it, as opposed to just sort of,
Well, otherwise you'll miss the target. Like if you know exactly what it is and you can define it, and also you can take the other side and you can get them to articulate, they're going to wedge themselves into their position, which I don't think they want to do, right? Most people don't want to wedge themselves into picking a side. But if you can have somebody do that, then it's easier to defend against or attack, and you can move on that way. Well, so speaking of policy, let's talk about foreign policy, specifically Afghanistan. I mean, I know that's on everybody's mind right now. They're seeing what's happening. I mean, just generally and broadly, what is your take on 2 points? Number one, leaving Afghanistan. And second to that is the way in which we did it.
Yeah, both bad ideas.
I think everybody agrees that the way we did it it was not right. Like
Yeah.
the overwhelming majority. But I think your first thing where you said it's bad on both accounts, that's where I think a lot of people get hung up. They don't understand why. So I would like to hear your...
They do, and my question to them is always, well, I don't, we definitely had to leave, but I don't like the way we did it. Well, how would we do it then? And nobody's answered that one. Because there is no good way to draw down zero troops. This is actually the only honest thing that Biden ever said about it. He's like, hey, it's going to be chaos if you draw down to zero. Yeah, no shit. That's why you shouldn't do it. Because it's absolutely correct that the Taliban will take over and then you have a terrorist Disneyland like you have now. And so knowing that ahead of time, why on earth would you pull everybody out when the military is saying, we need at least a few thousand people there. We should keep Bagram. We need to keep our allies afloat to an extent. Yes, that has a cost to it, but it's become a pretty minimal cost compared to the other outcome, which is what we're seeing now, a terrorist Disneyland. And
Right,
so
there's a cost to both sides of the
there's
equation.
always a cost, and there's a lot of utopianists out there on our side, the No More Endless Wars crowd, that just refuses to acknowledge the reality of the situation. Like they just think we can have it both ways, just not be there, but also not have a terrorist Disneyland. You can't have, you only live in the real world. If you want to write a fiction novel about your stupid world, go ahead, but they ain't real. And there is no good way to draw down to zero. I mean, we would have kept Bagram. Well, if you kept Bagram, then you'd have 2,500 troops there. So that's not zero.
Right.
If your goal is zero troops, you better expect this outcome. And people have just refused to believe that for years and years and years. And it has caused such a major geostrategic blunder for so many reasons, not just because we can't prevent 9/11s anymore, not just because of the terrorism aspect. That's going to be bad. And it's going to get much worse in the coming years as they finally get to regroup. They're so happy they get to regroup now. Not only that, but they're regrouping with a lot more money and a lot more weapons.
Equipment.
And also their recruitment is going to go through the roof, just given everything that's happened.
What makes you say that? Because of a perceived win? I don't even know if it's perceived, just
win.
because it is a win.
Yeah, it's as simple as that.
Right.
Yeah. It's just a perceived win on their part, and I'm not sure how else they would perceive it.
Right.
We didn't. This is what the No More Endless Wars crowd needs to understand too. We didn't end any war.
Right.
They're still at war, just like they were at war with us before September 11th. We weren't technically at war then.
Well, and I don't even believe that we, with 2,500 troops, with our last casualty in sometime in
it's
2020,
like 18 months ago. Yeah.
I don't know that we were actually in a war currently before this whole Afghanistan debacle.
It's hard to
we're not in a war in South Korea, but we're there.
Yeah, there's 30,000 troops there.
Right.
And even before even before the last 18 months, it was maybe an average of 6 deaths a year. Like very, very low. It just, back when I was in Afghanistan, that felt more like a war. It was constant operations. But again, it's like you're always at this decision after day 2. And day 1, everybody agreed we got to go to Afghanistan because we got hit. Okay, so that everybody agreed. Just nobody gets to say they didn't.
Right.
But day 2 was always a difficult question. And then again, the No More Endless Wars crowd acts like it was an easy question. Tucker Carlson will get on and say, well, we should have just left 19 years ago, right after, on day 2. Okay, Tucker. Well, fine. But can you at least acknowledge that that's not as easy of an answer as you're making it sound? Because all you're doing is allowing this region to revert to exactly the same conditions that caused 9/11 in the first place. So you tell me that that's a superior option. I'm not saying we have good options in front of us, but I am saying that we do have to deal with reality. And if we want to prevent these kind of attacks, which we did for the last 20 years, then you might have to go out and fight. And it sucks. I don't like that option. But guess what? All you people yelling about it online, you don't have to go. That's the other good news for you.
That's true.
You have known nothing but peace for the last 20 years. This is something Joe Biden said that really pissed me off. He's like, this generation has known nothing but war for the last 20 years. Screw you. That's not true. They've known nothing but peace. It's people like me that have known war. Very, very few of us. But everybody else has known peace. The people in New York City knew war on September 11, 2001. Ever since, they've known nothing but peace. Until de Blasio took over and, crime skyrocketed. But anyway.
Right, a different kind of
peace.
Sure.
But you get the point, right? Like, it just everybody on the left and so many on our side have been thinking about this with such naivete and such ignorance. And people died because of it. There's now a terrorist safe haven because of it. Chinese are emboldened because of it. Russia's emboldened because of it. Iran's emboldened because of it. We have no ability to have any strategic influence in that region at all anymore. And to say that's not important is to just reveal your ignorance. And this is what the No More Endless War crowd says.
I think this goes back to your thing about the populist argument, right?
It's populism.
This is what
it's
we
100% populism. Yeah.
Well, and I think also, as somebody who's, a civilian who doesn't see everything that you see, I think it is easier to say, well, yeah, I don't want our sons and daughters over there dying for.
Yeah, it's easy to say that.
Right.
I don't want people dying.
Right.
Thanks for that opinion.
Yeah.
Me neither.
Nobody wants anybody to die.
But honestly, like the entire opinion is based on feelings, and like and what really irks me about, I'm really speaking to the conservative side. I don't really care what the liberals say about this, because they're always on a different side than me. I'm extremely disappointed in how so many of the populists on our side have come to these conclusions, and they always feel like they're moralizing over me. Like when they just resort to name calling, like you're a neocon and a rhino.
Right,
well, fine, but you're an idiot. So
because I told people you were coming on the pot, and that's what I hear that a lot. I'm like, well, like, why do you think that? Well,
why? Because endless wars.
Right.
Well, thanks for your really informed opinion. I hope you're listening to this podcast right now, and you can hear me calling you an idiot.
Well, there's a bunch of people that they'll say, oh, well. And this is what frustrates me. If we're talking about frustrations, is people will say, well, have somebody on that, we don't always agree with. I'm like, okay, well, let's bring this person on and that person on.
Then
I'm going to skip that episode. I don't want to listen to that person. It's like, well, okay, what do you want?
And I don't know who your audience is, because you're not really a political podcast.
No, we're not politically driven, but I would say that the bulk of our audience is going to be more conservative in nature.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's the loud ones. Look, the majority aren't that way, but the loud, angry young men online, and they're angry, loud young men online that really love shit talking. This is what I've noticed, and like they're the ones who just kind of resort to these emotional arguments, and these are also the toughest guys, right? These are the ones who like to self-characterize as real tough guys, like real free men, and it's like, bro, you're just an emotional wreck. You're an emotional wreck, and you're relying on emotional opinions and just to feed your own anger. And it's weird, and you need to stop, because it's not manly at all. A manly thing to do would be to actually think through some problems and maybe not resort to name calling. And maybe learn some things. Especially about subjects you don't know.
A level of humility that you can sit down and have a conversation like this and say, I don't understand why you think this. Please explain. And I think one of two things is going to happen. Either I'm just going to double down on my current belief because you explained it and I still don't agree with it, and I'm just going to be comfortable with where I am, which is fine. Or maybe I hear something that I'm like, oh, I hadn't considered that way, and we see it from a different perspective, and then we come to some sort of, at least closer to a mutual consensus about how to deal with these things.
And I think in conversation, most people can get to that point. Social media has brought out the worst in people by far. To finish my thought, what I was saying was what these young angry guys like to do is sort of moralize over people like me and make it sound like they're saving soldiers that I just want to go kill. Like I just want to send these young men. I'm just a politician that wants to send young men off to their death. It's like, hey, moron, you realize I am that young man, right? Like, you realize I am that guy.
And the things that you've seen, personally experienced, friends, brothers, that you have personally experienced.
Yeah, I mean, it just holds no sway with me when they do that, and it's like, and also to pretend like they're saving us from ourselves or saving us from the whims of big government, as if veterans are just these victims, like these poor little victims that just got sent to an unjust war. No, veterans are actually people who understood why we went over there. I speak to a lot of Gold Star families, and recently too, and the reason we did this big call with all SEAL Gold Star families was just kind of get a sense where everybody was at. And, I kind of came on just to deliver a message that, your son or husband's sacrifice was not in vain. And they were just kind of like, yeah, we know that. We know that. That's not why we're pissed. We know their sacrifices weren't in vain because we know why they went over there. We know that they were taking the fight to the enemy so they wouldn't take it here.
Right.
By the way, that line triggers the No More Endless War crowd you wouldn't believe. And when it triggers them, I'm like, why are you so emotional about this? What part of that isn't true? They just don't get it. Anyway, and so
what would be the response to that? Because I've heard that before.
They just get mad?
It just seems to me like, yeah, people do. I have heard people say that.
But I don't know what their counter-argument is. Their counter-argument is usually, no. We created wars in the Middle East.
For the oil, for the resources,
and that's why they hate us.
Right.
And so we did it all. It's a very liberal argument because this is what liberal college professors have been teaching kids for decades, stemming from the Vietnam radicalism. And that infiltrated the right in a very profound way. And it's a stupid argument, especially when you're talking about Sunni extremism, Islamic extremism. Yeah. It's a very stupid argument. And it's just seeping in ignorance. I mean, in one way I'll frame it to people is, okay, what exactly did we do to Osama bin Laden to get him to commit 9/11? Was it,
or even before that?
Yeah, I mean, was it us supporting him in the Mujahideen against the Soviets in the 80s, being on his side? Is that what pissed him off? Or maybe it was us defending his homeland of Saudi Arabia from Saddam Hussein in the first Gulf War. Is that what pissed him off? We've done nothing but favors for this guy, in a transactional sense, for years. And yet he planned all of the bombings in the 90s. Remember World Trade Center, embassy bombings, USS Cole.
Yep.
And it all escalated to 9/11. And so why? The question is, it's because he just hates us.
Right.
It's an ideology that you can't understand as a Westerner. And you need to get over that misunderstanding and just accept that they're at war with us and that you will be in a perpetual war with them. And the sooner we can come to that reality, the sooner we might make some smarter foreign policy decisions.
It's a very utopian thought that if we just live and let live, that nobody will bother us and we just let them do their thing. And
it's the libertarian side of the conservative movement. I mean, they don't believe in a foreign policy. They really
isolation, right?
Yeah, it's isolationism. It's utopianism. I mean, libertarianism is often just as utopian, at least in certain subjects. Look, I'm a lot closer to libertarianism than I am to liberalism, but they're both utopianists in many ways, and especially with foreign policy.
What's the utopianism in libertarianism?
If we do nothing, everything will be fine.
Got it.
Right. But now that's taking libertarianism to an extreme.
Sure.
Of course, I think obviously everything's on a spectrum, and I think libertarianism makes a pretty good market theory. I think on a domestic economic policy, libertarianism probably has the best and the most to say about that. And again, I don't think you should classify all libertarians, but let's just take the foreign policy approach, the Rand Paul libertarianism, the Rand Paul foreign policy of just do nothing and believe that you can stick your head in the sand and everybody's going to leave you alone. That's not how that works. It just makes you an easier target.
True.
So
because you're not seeing where the threats
and again, go write a fiction novel about that world that you wish we lived in, and I'll read it, and I'm sure it'll be great. But when it comes to foreign policy, we got to live in the real world.
I think what people do is they make their opinions about other people or societies based on their own lens, right? So I personally just choose to live and let live. Personally, that's my philosophy. You do your thing, I'll do my thing. As long as you don't bother me, I don't bother you. You're not impacting me, good, do your thing. And then what we do is we take that belief, that value system, and then we put it on other people and other societies who don't think like that at all, which is partly the reason why when we started this conversation, you said, well, many people just can't understand this side. That's right, you can't understand. You're filtering it through your lens, and it doesn't make sense to you.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's accurate. I'm not sure what I have to add to that.
So coming back to Afghanistan, as we see the debacle, we see how challenging it is. Do you feel like the solution is to actually go, and this is going to happen. We're obviously, as soon as we pulled out 2,500 or 3,000 troops, we sent them 48 hours right back in.
Double the amount. Yeah.
We basically just stirred up the hornet's nest and said, go back in now once the hornet's nest is all stirred up.
Yep.
But what would be the path in your mind moving forward?
There's not a good path moving forward. I mean, there's a good chance we'll have to go back just the way we had to go back into Iraq after we did this exact same stupid thing 1 decade ago when Joe Biden was vice president. Now we're doing it when he's president. And we just don't learn. And again, I get so mad at the people who are like, well, I just don't like the way he did it because, that's bad. Well, screw you. You wanted him to do this. You wanted him to do this.
You mean
the No More Endless Wars crowd.
Got it. Okay.
The No More Endless Wars crowd. You wanted him to do this exact thing. You don't get to criticize him for it. You just don't. There was no good path to zero.
I don't know if that's true. I mean, I agree with that, what you just said. There's no good path to zero. But I don't know that saying that we don't want endless wars would disqualify you from having an opinion about the way that it was done.
No, you can have your opinion. I'm not going to listen to it.
Well, and that's fair. I mean, we all can choose what we listen to, but I still believe that
I'm still waiting for somebody to give me this is exactly how it should have gone. And there's probably there's definitely modes of improvement for sure. But here's the thing. Joe Biden actually got lucky that the Taliban took over so quickly. Because imagine a different scenario. Imagine that he pulled out and everything was fine. The Afghan government was still going strong, and now we're all thinking, this is going okay.
This actually worked out.
Our allied government is doing well enough, like they're surviving. Women are going to school, decent enough. That's great. And then 2 months later, the Taliban go on their offensive instead of 2 days later. So imagine that scenario. We still have a bunch of U.S. citizens in Afghanistan because they had no reason to want to leave, right? Because their government was still...
false sense of security there.
A lot of interpreters, same thing. So the exact same problem, except we have no ability now to move that 5,000 troops right back in quickly the way we did.
Right.
So it actually could have been much worse, even if it had gone better. And people aren't thinking through the actual situation on the ground and the actual possibilities. This is why I say, I really don't see... If your goal, we would have provided close air support. Fine, then we're not at zero troops. Again, if you're going to end the war, at least on in your kind of fantasy world where you're ending a war and you're going to zero troops, you will get this outcome. And I've been trying to tell people that for years. And you can sense how frustrated I am and pissed off I am because at my own side, we've been making these dumb emotional arguments for years, and it got people killed. It lost America an enormous strategic foothold in the war on terror, and as well as a strategic foothold in a region that is right next to Russia, China, and Iran. And
right,
Pakistan.
the borders. Yeah. So,
which I didn't answer your question, I think, as I got on a tangent, just going off about that again. What was your original question?
I can't even remember what I said, but no, I think it's important. But I guess what we need to evaluate then is what is somebody like me or somebody listening need to do to be educated about these things, because yes, we do make decisions based on emotion. We do make decisions based in ignorance because we don't know or don't have access to all the information. So what do we do? I mean, obviously we can listen as much as we can. We can stay in tune as much as we can, but there's only so much we can get.
Be humble. It goes back to what we were saying earlier. So again, you talked about the angry kids online. It's like, what do they lack most? Humility. Just think for a second that you might not know what the hell you're talking about. And if you are going to have a really strong opinion, make sure you can really defend it without just kind of resorting to silly slogans and name calling. A little bit of humility would go a long way in our national discourse. I know what you had asked, by the way. It was, what are we going to do now? And the answer is no. I wouldn't advocate for retaking a bunch of airfields in Afghanistan. I mean, you just have to basically start over, and that's not a reasonable position to have now. We've lost it.
Right.
Now, if it becomes worse, just the way Iraq became worse with ISIS, you might see a necessity for a reinvasion. If there's a major attack on the homeland, it almost seems inevitable.
Right.
I just don't know when.
Right.
And it's really infuriating for those of us who have just understood this situation for a long time and have just failed to communicate it, I guess. Well, I mean, I only started in the last couple of years, so but I'm frustrated with the people who knew better in power over the last 20 years who just failed to be persuasive about it.
I mean, maybe that's definitely part of it. The other part of it is I think there's a lot of people who are just willfully, blissfully ignorant about it. And you could have been created the best argument in the world, and still there's a huge percentage of the population who's like, I don't care.
Or worse, there's just again, it goes back to the emotional slogan of just end the war. Bring the troops home.
Right.
And it just makes somebody feel good to say that. It makes them feel morally superior, even to
Well,
somebody like me.
it sounds right.
It sounds right. Yeah. There's a lot of things that sound right, but aren't
in reality. Sure.
Yeah. It's like life is more complicated than that.
Yeah.
So, yeah. I mean, my frustration shows quite a bit. I'm still pissed off about it.
So what do you do in your day-to-day work that helps address some of these issues? Is it getting other politicians together? Is it having these types of conversations? Is it continuing to present this information to the public? Like, what is it that your work consists of to make sure we're making better decisions moving forward?
Well, you run for office and you you have a voice in these things. I mean, the issues I work on most are actually not national security related. I'm not on those committees. I don't need to be, because I can affect that conversation plenty from the outside.
What committees do you sit on currently?
Energy and commerce. So,
energy and commerce.
Yeah. So energy and commerce, and I focus on energy, environment, and healthcare. And that's important to my district. It's important to the Republican side because those are arguments we tend to suck at, and we need to do a lot better at. If we had a vision for healthcare that Americans could get behind, or at least understand what the hell we're talking about, we would never lose an election again. So,
what is your vision then for healthcare?
You need to look at healthcare through the lens of premium support models, meaning, so Obamacare subsidizes insurance companies.
Right.
Government spending subsidizes a mix of insurance companies and hospitals. Nobody's really subsidizing the actual patient. And that's the proper way to look at the safety net for healthcare. So if we agree with the left that everybody should have access to good healthcare, and I think that's a decent thing to agree to, okay? We want people to have
access to it. Sure.
Here's a goal. We want everybody in America to have access to good quality healthcare. Sure. Decent goal. Extremely difficult to get to. The left wants to get there by just declaring that you have access, that every service you get will just be paid for by government, right? The doctor will just bill the government through Medicare for all, and that'll work out.
Which tends to, correct me if I'm wrong, just basically overinflate the prices of everything, which just gets passed down to other people.
It not in this case, okay? Because they'll have price controls on it. So Medicare for all is price controls, and so what's going to happen is you're going to underpay doctors and hospitals. So you're taking the free market out of it. So you're going to look a lot more like Canada and the UK. And
that reduces the quality of care, the quality of physicians and doctors that you get.
It's the big thing you lose. You're going to have a lot less doctors. You're going to have a lot less facilities.
Because why would they go into the work and acquire $500,000 of debt if they're going to make $80,000 a year? I mean,
so you get enormous wait times. You get triaged care. You're not going to get to choose the care that you want. But you'll get that basic level, right? But forget about innovation. Forget about that next cutting edge medical device or drug, because there's no incentive to make them anymore. We're the last country that there's an incentive to even do that. And that'll all just be gone. So if you're not willing to sacrifice quality for that, universal access, which I'm not, then you have to subsidize the patient. And you have to look at it through like the way we do food. Because another thing we agree on as Americans is we don't want people starving to death in America. So if you're too poor to buy food, what do? We give you a voucher,
Sure,
a food stamp, and you go buy food. What we don't do is say, go pick out the food you want, go to the cashier will bill some third party, and then you'll be on your way with whatever you wanted, and you don't even know how much it costs.
but I think with food, let's take food for example. I think most people, I don't know if most people, but I think a common thought is that welfare should only last for a period of time. But when it comes to healthcare, you're saying potentially indefinitely, or is that just a period of time as well?
No, it should still be means tested. You know, I don't think. And the beauty with this vision is it would be a way to replace. Look, let's get utopian for a second. Now it's almost impossible to get to this point with a single bill. All right, I think it would reasonably take 10 to 20 years if Republicans had full control and everybody agreed on the vision that I'm talking about.
Sure.
Because it's complicated. But really, the only thing we're talking about in healthcare, the only thing we're debating is what to do with the people who are in the individual market uninsured.
Right.
You know, it's tens of millions. It's not that many people. Most people are on an employment plan. Let's just leave them alone. If they like their plan, just leave them alone.
Right.
Then you got a population on Medicare, which is going insolvent, and that's a problem. But there's other reasons for that. So let's talk about the uninsured population. Obamacare tried to solve that, but it added so many regulations atop the market that it just made prices increase. It also just basically said we're just gonna change the standards for Medicaid so just more people can be on it. So now you're just putting more people on a government program. They did some other things too that just made healthcare more expensive, or at least insurance more expensive. So you need to keep quality. You have to keep the market forces in it. You know, choice and competition.
Right.
And so that's how it works in the food stamp business. I mean, they just go and they still choose different foods. So people still have to compete. Companies still have to compete
right, sure.
for that customer base. So, you know, below a certain income, everybody getting back to utopian theory here, everybody should have a health savings account, which is a tax deductible account, just like we talk about education savings accounts.
Right.
Same kind of thing.
Pull it out.
Everybody should have one. You should be able to put money into it. And if you're below a certain income, the government puts money into it and says, here, you can use this amount to pay for your direct primary care doctor. We don't have time to get into what I mean by that, but your primary care doctor, your insurance policy, you choose it. You choose it. And by the way, this is also how Medicare Advantage works, more or less. Medicare Advantage is a Republican idea that is very popular among seniors, comes in way under budget, and it works really well because it subsidizes the patient and gets the patient what it needs,
right.
he or she needs, while also maintaining the market forces of choice and competition, because it forces those insurance companies to compete against one another.
Which keeps prices lower, innovation higher. Right.
Yeah.
That just makes sense.
But also allows for access,
Sure.
you know, which is something we all agree on. So that needs to be the Republican vision. It's patient empowerment is what I would say the Republican vision needs to be. And that gets people uncomfortable because it's like, it sounds like another entitlement. We're already massively entitled when it comes to healthcare.
Yeah,
I'm
no
talking
doubt.
about shifting that money around in a more reasonable way, in a more sustainable way, and it actually gets us closer to more of a free market system with the benefits of a safety net.
Right.
So that's about as quickly as we can talk about healthcare.
And we had to be fairly quick because I know you're on a time constraint and a time crunch with as busy as things have been. Obviously, we could talk about other policies and other things, and maybe we can do another podcast down the road. But I do want to tell you that I really appreciate you, again, with those videos and things that you're doing online where you're sharing this, even just taking the time with me to share this, because this is going to go out to tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of guys who are going to be able to listen to it and think, okay, well, maybe I ought to look at these issues a little deeper than just basing it solely off emotion. And that goes for regardless of what side of the aisle you're on, because everybody tends to get that way.
Conservatives like to think it's the liberal snowflakes that are so emotional. That is just not, I mean, it's true, they are, but
so
our side easily matches them.
Yes, 100%.
And the cancel culture, the emotion, it's got to stop. If we think it's not on the conservative side, you're not paying attention. I mean, it's there, and it is. Like, if we're going to be the people that we envision ourselves to be, we need to just do a little bit better, hold ourselves to a bit of a higher standard. There's been a lot of it seems to me that the conservatives, and just in frustration as the left grabs more power, they've sort of started to copy their tactics a little bit.
Right.
That has to stop. Because there's a reason that we have the moral high ground. And I know sometimes it doesn't feel that way, but there's a reason we have it. Conservatism is based in tried and true traditions and trial and error throughout history. It is conserving our founding principles. The left has none of that. And we should be a little bit more confident in ourselves and our arguments without resorting to the nonsense that the left often does. And I think that's how that emotion sort of reveals itself.
Well, I mean, dialogue is the key for that, right? So that's a big part of what we're doing here. So again, appreciate the time. Keep up the good fight. We'll keep following and seeing what you're up to, because we need more men who are doing things to turn the tide a little bit and maintain what it is we have. So thanks again, man. Appreciate it.
Appreciate it. Thanks for having me.